So let's go ahead and turn to Leviticus chapter 10. And we'll begin by reading verses 1 and 2. So Leviticus 10, starting at verses 1 and 2. And Nadab and Abihu, the sons of Aaron, took either of them his censer, and put fire therein, and put incense thereon, and offered strange fire before the Lord, which he commanded them not. And there went out fire from the Lord, and devoured them, and they died before the Lord. So beginning in chapter 10, we see that the same fire which devoured the burnt offering earlier in the very previous chapter now devours the two sons of Aaron, the priests of the tabernacle, Nadab and Abihu. Now, of course, Aaron was the high priest, and so Nadab and Abihu would have been next in line in the succession of the high priesthood of Israel. But the same fire consumed them, whereas the burnt offering was accepted. This strange fire which Nadab and Abihu offered was not accepted, to the point that it caused them their life. And so we have to be careful to be sure that what we're offering to God is acceptable in His sight, and that we don't offer strange fire that can bring about a curse upon us, or bring upon God's discipline, basically. Now, go ahead and turn back to Exodus 30, and we're going to look at exactly. We're going to ask the question: what was the strange fire that the sons of Aaron offered? So back in Exodus 30, and as we saw last time, there are a lot of crossovers between Leviticus and Exodus. We looked at the holy garments of the priests, and we saw that there are a lot of, all the details are in Exodus. So go ahead and turn back to Exodus 30, and we're just going to spend a few minutes looking at the golden altar of incense that was inside the tabernacle. Now, the Bible says that the altar was made of shittim wood and overlaid with pure gold. So Exodus 30, starting at verse 1, and thou shalt make an altar to burn incense upon, of shittim wood shalt thou make it. A cubit shall be the length thereof, and a cubit the breadth thereof. 80 shall it be, and 2 cubits shall be the height thereof. The horns thereof shall be of the same. And thou shalt overlay it with pure gold, the top thereof, and the sides thereof round about, and the horns thereof. And thou shalt make unto it a crown of gold round about. Now, what is shittim wood? This was wood from the acacia tree, which was abundant in the Sinai desert. And this is really just a side point, but if you look up shittim in the Bible, everything from the Ark of the Covenant to the to the table of the showbread, to the tabernacle walls and the pillars, were all made of shittim wood. So this was wood that was available, and it was abundant in the Sinai desert, where the tabernacle was being reared up, like we looked at last time. And all of it was overlaid with pure, solid gold. And if you look at Exodus 30, keep reading, and starting in verse 6, it says, and thou shalt put it before the veil that is by the ark of the testimony. So it's talking about the altar of incense is to be put before the veil that is by the ark of the testimony, before the mercy seat that is over the testimony, where I will meet with thee. And Aaron shall burn thereon sweet incense every morning. When he dresseth the lamps, he shall burn incense upon it. And when Aaron lighteth the lamps at even, he shall burn incense upon it, a perpetual incense before the Lord throughout your generations. Ye shall offer no strange incense thereon, nor burnt sacrifice, nor meat offering, neither shall ye pour drink offering thereon. So we see that the altar of incense that the sons of Aaron were responsible for was placed inside the sanctuary of the tabernacle near the veil, which separated the inner sanctuary from the outer sanctuary. So inside the tabernacle, inside the tent that they'd reared up, you had the outer sanctuary, and separating that was this veil. And that veil, over on the other side of the veil, was the inner sanctuary where the Ark of the Testimony, or the Ark of the Covenant, as they call it, was inside, and then it was overlaid with the mercy seat, was over the Ark of the Testimony. And the altar of incense was laid just next to the veil on the other side in the outer sanctuary. And this will become more important later as we get to chapter 16, dealing with the once-a-year blood atonement, which is the final blood atonement for all sin, for all people who will receive it by faith. But basically, where all of these items were, the Ark of the Covenant was, the mercy seat was, the table of the showbread, the altar of incense, and it was all stationed right there outside the veil. And there's a lot of symbolism regarding the incense, but practically speaking, it covered up the fleshy smell of the animal sacrifices that were happening daily. So that's one of the purposes, just as a practical matter, why there was incense. And it made the tabernacle smell more pleasant and more sweet, so it would be a sweet-smelling savor again unto the Lord. And spiritually, the incense symbolized the prayers of the saints unto God. Okay, so Revelation 8, we see this throughout the Bible, where incense represents the prayers of the saints ascending unto God. But Revelation 8, starting at verse 3, it reads, "And another angel came and stood at the altar, having a golden censer, and there was given unto him much incense, that he should offer it with the prayers of all saints upon the golden altar which was before the throne." So there's a heavenly version of this in the throne of God, in heaven with God. And what we see on earth is just a simulacrum, which is a replica, so to speak, of what is in heaven. It's just a foreshadowing, a representation, and a symbol of what's actually in heaven. And it all represents, the throne room of God. And so this altar is there, and in verse 4 in Revelation 8:4, "And the smoke of the incense which came with the prayers of the saints ascended up before God out of the angel's hand." Okay, so we have this very clear parallel with that in Revelation 8. In Psalm 141, verse 2, it also says, "Let my prayer be set forth before thee as incense, and the lifting up of my hands as the evening sacrifice." And we see this again and again in various Psalms and Scriptures. And in Exodus 30, starting at verse 7, God instructs Moses to burn the incense inside the tabernacle day and night continually. Okay, we just read that. "And Aaron shall burn thereon sweet incense every morning when he dresseth the lamps. He shall burn incense upon it. And when Aaron lighteth the lamps at even, he shall burn incense upon it, a perpetual incense before the Lord throughout your generations." So our prayers and our worship are ascending up to God perpetually. And he hears them as saints of God as we gather around and enter his throne room in the Spirit. And so because the altar of incense served a very specific and holy function, any aberration, any perversion from the specific instructions could be serious enough to lead to chastisement or death. And verse 9 says, "Ye shall offer no strange incense thereon, nor burnt sacrifice, nor meat offering, neither shall ye pour drink offering thereon." So we see the word strange incense applied there. So obviously Nadab and Abihu offered strange incense before the Lord. Now if you read Exodus 30, starting at verse 34, it lists the ingredients, the specific ingredients that were necessary for the incense that was to be burned. It was a very specific list of items that made up this incense. So Exodus 34, it says, "And the Lord said unto Moses, Take unto thee sweet spices, stacte, and onycha, and galbanum, these sweet spices with pure frankincense, of each shall there be a like weight. And thou shalt make it a perfume, a confection after the art of the apothecary, tempered together, pure and holy. And thou shalt beat some of it very small, and put of it before the testimony in the tabernacle of the congregation, where I will meet with thee. It shall be unto you most holy. And as for the perfume which thou shalt make, ye shall not make to yourselves according to the composition thereof. It shall be unto thee holy for the Lord. Whosoever shall make like unto that, to smell thereto, shall even be cut off from his people." So it's saying that if you even use this incense for your personal use, then you will be cut off from the people. And obviously altering those ingredients would also be a major sin, and it would be considered strange fire. Now, we see that Nadab and Abihu were cut off by God himself for offering strange fire inside the tabernacle. And as Brother Marshall pointed out in one sermon, and I think that was in Galatians 1, to cut off can actually mean to be killed, not just to be separated from your people. And, you can look at Galatians 1 from Marshall Marcus, and he goes into more detail on that. Now, the word strange, as in strange fire, also has certain connotations that went along with it. Consider that the first time the word strange is used in the Bible, it is associated with strange gods. And, that's in Genesis 35:2. The first time, as you know, that a word appears in the Bible, it defines the meaning of that word throughout the rest of the Bible. That's what we call the Bible, the King James Bible Dictionary. In Genesis 35:2, it says, "Then Jacob said unto his household and to all that were with him, Put away the strange gods that are among you, and be clean, and change your garments." So strange gods, the first time that the word strange is used in the Bible, it refers to strange gods. And so we get this association in our mind of strange fire, strange gods, and it takes on that meaning. And so that the word strange is now cognitively associated with false gods. And that's the key to understanding what Aaron's sons had really done. They had used the holy incense in the tabernacle of God, in the holy, tabernacle. They used the incense in worship of strange gods, false gods, which were abhorrent to God. Now, Psalm 81 also, Psalm 81:9 says, "There shall no strange god be in thee, neither shalt thou worship any strange god." And so it was for no light reason that they were killed before the Lord. God was also establishing the ordinances and regulations for tabernacle worship that set Israel apart from all other nations. So an example was being set here. The whole nation was looking to Nadab and Abihu, and it was important that they followed the specific ordinances of the Lord and not offer the strange fire or alter it in any way or offer it unto a different god other than Jehovah, which they were worshiping. Now, Leviticus 10, starting in verses, let's go back to Leviticus 10, now that you have some of the background for the altar of incense. And if you look back at Leviticus 10, starting at verse 3, God tells Aaron and his sons his remaining sons, not to publicly mourn Nadab and Abihu, because what had transpired was righteous in the sight of God. So Leviticus 10, starting at verse 3, "And unto the children of Israel thou shalt speak, saying, Take ye a kid of the goats for a sin offering." I'm sorry, that was Leviticus 9. Let's just go back here to Leviticus 10, starting at verse 3. "Then Moses said unto Aaron, This is that the Lord spake, saying, I will be sanctified in them that come nigh me, and before all the people I will be glorified. And Aaron held his peace. And Moses called Mishael and Elzaphan, the sons of Aziel, the uncle of Aaron, and said unto them, Come near, carry your brethren from before the sanctuary out of the camp. So they went near and carried them in their coats out of the camp, and as Moses had said. So basically they got these cousins to come and carry their dead bodies out of the tabernacle where they had been struck dead, and carried them in their coats out of the camp. And this was, the ephod and all, what they were wearing. And they carried them out as Moses had instructed. And in verse 6, "And Moses said unto Aaron and unto Eleazar and unto Ithamar his sons, Uncover not your heads, neither rend your clothes, lest ye die, and lest wrath come upon all the people. But let your brethren, the whole house of Israel, bewail the burning which the Lord hath kindled. And ye shall not go out from the door of the tabernacle of the congregation, lest ye die. For the anointing oil of the Lord is upon you. And they did according to the word of Moses." So we see here that God instructed them not to uncover their heads and not to rend their clothing. And to rend is to tear. And when the Israelites would tear their clothing, this was a public display of mourning, among the Israelites. It was a way to basically, let out your sadness and mourn. And he says not to do this to them. He says, but to continue ministering in the service of the Lord inside the tabernacle. But he says, let everyone else, mourn. But they were not to do it, because what had transpired was righteous and it was right in the sight of God. Now, after that, Moses commands Aaron and his remaining sons to take their portion of the offerings and to eat it beside the altar in the holy place, because it was their due. So now the two other remaining sons of Aaron take their place. And this was the portion that we talked about in Leviticus 7. So let's take a look at that. Leviticus 10, starting at verse 12. It says, And Moses spake unto Aaron and unto Eleazar and unto Ithamar. So there was, he spoke to Aaron, and those were the two other sons. His sons that were left, take the meat offering that remaineth of the offerings of the Lord made by fire, and eat it without leaven beside the altar, for it is most holy. And so this was the portion of the priests that we talked about in Leviticus 7. They were to take it and eat their portion. Basically God was saying, keep going with worshiping, with worship of God inside the tabernacle. Nothing was to change after this, death of Nadab and Abihu. Not a minute, not a second was to be spared, other than letting the other people mourn. But the worship and the sacrifices were to go on, and the priests were not to mourn this death, because it was from God. And so we continue reading Leviticus 10, verses 12. We just read, now 13, and it says, And ye shall eat it in the holy place, because it is thy due, and thy son's due, of the sacrifices of the Lord made by fire, for so I commanded. And the wave breast and heave shoulder shall ye eat in a clean place, thou and thy sons and thy daughters with thee, for they be thy due, and thy sons' due, which are given out of the sacrifices of peace offerings of the children of Israel. The heave shoulder and the wave breast shall they bring with the offerings made by fire of the fat. If you remember, last time we talked about the wave offering. That was the portion for the priests, to wave it for a wave offering before the Lord, and it shall be thine and thy sons with thee by a statute forever, as the Lord hath commanded. And Moses diligently sought the goat of the sin offering, and behold, it was burnt. And he was angry with Eleazar and Ithamar, the sons of Aaron, which were left alive, saying, Wherefore have ye not eaten the sin offering in the holy place, seeing it is most holy? And God hath given it to you to bear the iniquity of the congregation, to make atonement for them before the Lord. Behold, the blood of it was not brought in within the holy place. Ye should indeed have eaten it in the holy place, as I commanded. And at this point, I would have been afraid. They just also transgressed the ordinances of God and disobeyed Moses, who was a spokesman, for God. But something interesting happens here. If you continue to read in verse 19, and Aaron said unto Moses, Behold, this day have they offered their sin offering and their burnt offering before the Lord, and such things have befallen me. And if I had eaten the sin offering today, should it have been accepted in the sight of the Lord? And when Moses heard that, he was content. So basically, they don't eat their portion. They burn it. And, that was not according to the ordinances. But instead of them also now being punished, God actually, it says that Moses was content with Aaron's answer. And so what exactly happened here? Well, basically Aaron says, look, today I've lost my sons. Okay, and if I were to eat the offering, it would have been disingenuous. It wouldn't have been accepted in the sight of God, because it would have been, it wouldn't have been heartfelt. It wouldn't have been genuine before God. It wouldn't have been offered from the heart, but done out of compulsion. And surprisingly, even though these ordinances are so important, Moses accepts this answer, and Aaron is not disciplined for disobeying the ordinances of the tabernacle. And his sons are not disciplined either. This reveals something very important. Okay, on the one hand, Nadab and Abihu were struck dead for disobeying the ordinances and offering strange fire before God. But as I showed, that was in worship of false gods inside the tabernacle. Their heart was not right with God. Okay, they were worshiping another god. That's a major, there's a major difference there. On the other hand, Aaron also breaks the same ordinances, or not the exact same, but the ordinances, but his motives were entirely different. It was so that he could be sincere in his worship of God. Okay, so this tells us that God is not interested in empty ritual. He's not interested in the legalism of the Pharisees. We have to worship God from the heart and go where the Lord tells us to go and do what the Lord tells us to do. 1 Samuel chapter 15, verse 22 also says, And Samuel said, Hath the Lord as great delight in burnt offerings and sacrifices, as in obeying the voice of the Lord? Behold, to obey is better than sacrifice, and to hearken than the fat of rams. So this means that, it's not the empty ritual. It's not the ordinances themselves that matter, or where the power is, of God. It's obeying God from the heart. It's being genuine before God. And Aaron could not have genuinely offered, that worship of God in the tabernacle that day, and his sons. And, when his son had been killed, and when his brothers couldn't either. And so that was exactly it. And so we can't isolate the mechanics of all the sacrifices and ordinances from genuine worship. Otherwise, you have dead, empty ritual. Psalm 40 also says, starting in verse 6, Sacrifice An offering thou didst not desire. Mine ears hast thou opened. Burnt offering and sin offering hast thou not required. Then said I, Lo, I come. In the volume of the book it is written of me. I delight to do thy will, O my God. Yea, thy law is within my heart. Okay, so Paul quotes also Psalm 40, the same one we just read in Hebrews 10, where he says, then said I, Lo, I come. In the volume of the book it is written of me, speaking of Jesus Christ himself. And so it's important that the law be obeyed from our heart and not just out of empty ritual. Of course, there are times when you don't feel like doing the right thing. You still need to obey the law and be good as far as, being moral, even if you don't feel like it. That's not the point. I'm talking about worship of God, and just worshiping God in spirit and in truth. Psalm 51, starting at verse 16, for thou desirest not sacrifice, else would I give it. Thou delightest not in burnt offering. The sacrifices of God are a broken spirit, a broken and a contrite heart, O God, thou wilt not despise.